Okay, so in the last video, in talking about senses, I mentioned that Frege says, and his view at any rate has this consequence, that full knowledge of a referent would require us to be able to say immediately whether any given sense attached to it. And I said that view has important ramifications for philosophical methodology. In this video, I'm going to give you sort of a taste of how that works. So let's start with this claim. If you know everything about an individual, it could be an individual table, like a particular table. It could be an individual dog, like my dog Spice. It could be an individual person, like Barack Obama. But if you know everything about an individual, you can say whether or not any given descriptor applies to it. Now that should seem kind of intuitive. You can see it by looking at it in the other direction. If you can't say whether a descriptor applies to something, then you don't know everything about it. So if I can't say whether Mark Twain has white hair or not, then I don't know everything about him. And if I know everything about him, then I can say whether or not he has white hair. Now, let's just say a sense consists of a series of descriptions. Remember, senses are these Platonic form-like things, abstract inhabitants of the third realm. And you might think descriptions are concrete things, so they must be distinct. And you might then want to say descriptions kind of capture or point at senses, but aren't identical with them. But to make it easy, let's just say a sense consists of a series of descriptions. Okay, so suppose 1 and 2 are both true. So a sense consists of a series of descriptions. And if you know everything about an individual, you can say whether or not any given sense a descriptor applies to it. It follows that if you know everything about an individual, you can say whether or not any given sense applies to it. That seems pretty intuitive. Now, this number 3 here is just the claim we had it before, put a different way. So if you know everything about an individual, you can say whether or not any given sense applies to it, is to say full knowledge of the referent, the individual, the thing you're referring to, requires you to be able to say whether any given sense attaches to it. Okay. So that's what we mean when we say full knowledge of the referent requires us to be able to say immediately whether any given sense attaches to it. We just mean that if you know everything about someone, you can say whether or not any given sense, which is a bunch of descriptions, applies to it. Okay, now let's add this, which Frege endorses, that anyone who understands a name grasps its sense. Well, if anyone who understands a name grasps its sense, and knowing all about a referent requires being able to say whether any given sense attaches to it, it follows that knowing about a referent requires being able to say whether any given name applies to it. So given full knowledge of the referent, anyone who understands a name can say immediately whether that name applies to it. Now, this is what is going to lead to our important methodological prescriptions. So suppose you describe our world without using any names. So for example, instead of saying the government seizes Jeff Bezos' fortune, you might say the government seizes the fortune of Amazon's best known CEO, assuming that this description is sufficient to fix the reference of the name Jeff Bezos. Well, according to 3, which says given full knowledge of the referent, anyone who understands the name can say immediately whether the name applies to it. If you read this description, the government seizes the fortune of Amazon's best known CEO, and you're a competent user of Jeff Bezos, then you can say, and suppose that gives the sense, then you can say immediately the government thereby has seized the fortune of Jeff Bezos. Okay, so according to 3, reading the description will allow any competent user of the name Jeff Bezos to say to whom each name, including Jeff Bezos, this should say will allow any competent user of a name, including Jeff Bezos, to say to whom each name, including Jeff Bezos, applies in that world. More generally, any competent user of a name N can say how N applies in any possible world that is described without using that name, provided that the description includes enough detail to fix how the name applies. This is going to be a key claim, so I want you to understand it. So the idea is, give me a description of our world. Don't include the name Jeff Bezos, but do include descriptions that are the sense of Jeff Bezos, like maybe Amazon's best known CEO. If I'm a competent user of Jeff Bezos, the name, then I'll be able to say of our world, oh, that guy, the one who's Amazon's best known CEO, that's Jeff Bezos. But of course, that's even if you change facts about our world, I'll still be able to do that. So suppose you give me a description of a world where Amazon's best known CEO has hair. Maybe he got a hair transplant. I'll be able to say, yes, that's Jeff Bezos because it's Amazon's best known CEO. And that description captures the sense of Jeff Bezos and the name refers to whatever satisfies the sense. So for any if name I'm competent with, I'll be able to say for any possible world you give me how the name applies in that world. Okay, so let's now consider what this suggests. So let F stand for a set of properties that Jeff Bezos actually has. It could be being bald and under 7 feet tall. It could be owning the Washington Post. It could be being the best known CEO of Amazon. Right now, it doesn't matter. So just let it stand for any arbitrary set of properties. Suppose a competent user of Jeff Bezos imagines a world in which a person has that set of properties. So a person P has that set of properties, and the imagining happens without using any names. Well, it follows that if she thinks Jeff Bezos doesn't apply to any particular person, then, if she thinks Jeff Bezos doesn't apply to the person who has F, then Jeff Bezos has F only contingently. So notice on the left-hand side here, we're saying something about the name. Something she thinks about the name. She thinks the name doesn't apply to a person just because that person has F. It follows that Jeff Bezos has F only contingently. Why? Because since she thinks Jeff Bezos doesn't apply to that person, Jeff Bezos doesn't apply to that person, which is to say that person isn't Jeff Bezos. So Jeff Bezos has F only contingently. And if she thinks Jeff Bezos does apply to that person, the person who has F, and moreover, she thinks the same of whoever has F in every world she can imagine, then Jeff Bezos has F necessarily. The point being, she can't imagine applying the name Jeff Bezos to anything that doesn't have F, which is to say, Jeff Bezos has F necessarily. Generalizing from A, for any sentence with a name as subject and property term as predicate, conceivability will imply possibility. Now, more generally still, if we say that kind terms work like names, we could say for any sentence with a name as subject and a property term as predicate, or for any name involving any sentence involving kind terms or whatever, conceivability will imply possibility. Basically, for any sentence with terms that work the way names work, conceivability will imply possibility. Generalizing from B, for any sentence with a name as subject and property term as predicate, dispositions to apply the name to possible worlds reveal the reference essence. So our dispositions to apply terms to possible worlds determine the essence of what we're referring to, or at least allow us to uncover the essence of what we're referring to. And thus we get this tight tie between investigating language and revealing the nature of reality. Okay, I'll stop there.